So, Logitech, huh? They think they can, not really be cooking up anything for a while now, making subpar stuff, a lackluster Superlight 2 release, talks about a subscription based service revolving around mice, whatever the heck that means. Logitech's been kind of weird, but out of nowhere, they have cooked up an ERGO Superlight. Is it the Superlight G703 like I was dreaming of? No, not at all. But regardless, they have come out with a new mouse, and it is a ERGO variation of the Superlight mouse that is extremely popular. And today I'm going to be reviewing the mouse and letting you guys know what my thoughts are overall of the mouse, doing some comparisons with some other shapes, and yeah, hopefully by the end of this video you will know whether or not you want to pick up the DeX or not, and did Logitech cook? Hopefully that question is answered by the end of the video. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you guys are new, I'm just going to break the video down to 3 quick parts. First part is going to be about the specs. Second part is some shape comparisons. And third part is just my overall personal experience and my opinions. Alright guys, thank you for watching. Let's get straight into the video. Alright guys, so let's quickly just go over the specs of the mouse. First price, we're looking at $160. Definitely expensive. It's a lot. There's no sort of jumping around that. It is an expensive mouse. We're going to talk about the price later on compared to its competitors and other ERGO mice. But yeah, $160, not cheap at all. It comes in black, white, and pink, which as you can see, I am using the pink version. It is rated for 60 grams. Now, for my personal copy of the mouse, it came in actually at 58, so a little bit under 60. And if you're familiar with Logitech mice, they'll usually come with this center puck here. It's also part of like its wireless charging that they have with their other products. I actually removed that little puck and was able to get down to about 57.2 grams. And with removing that puck, the weight feels super solid. It feels extremely balanced. The switches on the mouse, I've never really enjoyed and loved Logitech's optical switches. These though, compared to the Superlight 2, actually feel a little bit lighter than the Superlight 2, at least the 2 copies that I have. And here's a quick little sound test of those switches. They are mentioning that they have a new advanced version of their Hero 2 sensor. Now, I've had some time to use the mouse, of course, and on paper, they're claiming to be the most advanced sensor in gaming, period. In actual use, could I tell you that this is the king of all sensors? Not really. That's not to say it doesn't feel amazing. I've had 0 issues with this sensor. I haven't once ever had a hiccup or an annoyance. The sensor has been phenomenal. But I've also had phenomenal experience with 3395 sensors and 3950 sensors. So to say that this is the best, it could be the most advanced, right? But is it astronomically different from other sensors? No, not really. Beyond that though, it is a great feeling sensor. I've had no issues. Every time I use it, I've enjoyed it. So no complaints in the sensors. Now, this is rated for up to 8K polling, and if you have a normal Superlight 2 as well, instead of this Superlight 2 DeX, they've actually been pumping out updates to give up to 8K polling for both mice. I know when the Superlight 2 initially came out, it was only offering 2K polling, and then eventually they made an update, allowed it to have 4K, and then before this mouse came out for sale, there was an update allowing the mouse to go up to 8K, and this shares the same type of firmware, and so both mice have 8K polling. It's not just in the new DeX. If you have a Superlight 2, you will also be able to have 8K polling for that mouse as well. And it's nice that you're not having to pay extra for a dongle that gives that 8K polling. The mouse is already expensive enough, so the fact that they, give that and allow you to just have that for free is nice, and it's definitely appreciated. But yeah, overall, the mouse, in terms of specs, there was never anything that bugged me a ton. The battery life on 8K, I was getting around maybe 18 to 19 hours. It's rated for 95 hours of battery life, but that is absolutely not for the 8K. That is probably for the 1K polling that offers that amount of battery. So if you're someone that doesn't need the 8K, the 1K will give you a substantial amount of battery. And even at 8K with the 18 to 19 hours, I mean, that's a couple days of playing games for me personally. So I never had an issue with the battery. Had a couple days of gaming, needed to charge it. There you go. Never had an issue. Never felt like an inconvenience. So let's get now into the shape comparisons. Alrighty guys, so I am not super familiar with ERGO mice. I've had pretty bad experiences with some that I've tried. So I had to do a little bit of research and do a little bit of digging to find some mice that kind of fit this one. And I found 4 that were similar to it, but as you can see, none of them are going to be identical to the DeX at all. Some will have some close similarities. Some will be very different to the DeX. I never really could find an ERGO mouse that was just like this shape. But regardless, I will show you guys these comparisons. And yeah, I found 4 mice, and the first one we're going to be starting off with is the Ponage Stormbreaker. As you can see here on the top-down view of the 2 mice, you can see that the Logitech DeX is longer than the Stormbreaker. In terms of the sides, specifically the right side, they do line up quite a bit for just a small portion of the mouse. But as you begin to flare out towards the back side of the mouse, the Logitech does curve out more and is wider and longer. On the left side, I would say the Logitech curves in a little more deeper than the Stormbreaker, and the Stormbreaker is a little bit more wider at the front end of the 2 mice compared to the DeX. If we look at the side profile, the DeX, as you'll see compared to some other mice, and this one specifically a lot, it's just very equally rounded on the top. There isn't any sort of aggressive slope on the front or back side, whereas as you can see with the Stormbreaker here, specifically on the front side of the mouse, it has a very aggressive downward slope for the front. And then on the side, it has not as aggressive, but more aggressive than the DeX. And yeah, so that is the comparison of the Stormbreaker. Let's get into the next one. Now looking here, we're comparing the X-Lite V3 Large from Pulsar with the Superlight 2 DeX. And as you can see here, in terms of overall length, it looks like they're fairly similar, if not identical in length. If you look at the top-down view specifically, you can tell that the DeX is a much thinner mouse than the X-Lite V3. If we look at the right side here, they're fairly almost lined up, with the X-Lite being a little bit wider here, but then as you get to the middle, it really starts to separate itself, where the DeX starts to curve in a little bit, whereas the Pulsar X-Lite V3 starts to widen already. They do again kind of meet towards the bottom right of the mouse, with the DeX being a little bit wider here on the right backside. They do again connect here in the full backside of the mouse. And then actually the X-Lite V3 is a little bit wider in the back portion here. And then on the left side of the mouse, you can see a clear difference there, where the X-Lite V3 kind of just goes straight up, where the DeX curves in much deeper than the X-Lite V3. So a much wider mouse than the DeX. And if we look at the top-down view, you can see that the front is more rounded than the DeX, and the highest point of the X-Lite compared to the DeX, I believe, is sooner than the DeX. And what happens with that, you can see that the drop-off slope happens much sooner than the DeX. So even though they are the same length, the highest point of the X-Lite is sooner than the DeX, and it gets a much sooner and much more aggressive downward slope in the back compared to the DeX. And so now we've seen the DeX, let's now jump to the next mouse. So like the X-Lite V3 here, we're going to have some similarities with that with the Death Adder V3 Pro, where they are just much more wider of a mouse compared to the DeX. You can see here on the left side, like the X-Lite V3, much more wider, has its similarities in the bottom right side and a little bit on the bottom left side, but a much more wider mouse, not as much curves and not as deep of curves as the DeX, like the comparison with the X-Lite V3. If we look at the side profile here, the Death Adder is a little bit higher here in the front. They actually start to get pretty, if not identical, at the highest point for both mice. But even with that, the Death Adder V3 has a slightly more aggressive downward slope in the back compared to the DeX. And so now we've done with the Death Adder, let's go to the final mouse, which I think has the most similarities of the DeX. And so now we're looking at the WL Mouse Sword X, and this one, in my opinion, has the most similarities to it, like I just said. Still, again, I don't think any mouse that I'm comparing to the DeX today is close to even being identical, but definitely this one has the most similarities. If we look at overall length, the DeX is a little bit longer of a mouse. In terms of the width, you can see that on the sides here, the Sword X is fairly similar, if not identical on this left side. The DeX is a little bit wider here in the front, but then they begin to sync up towards that middle portion, and then is a little bit wider on the back right side of the mouse and the fully middle back side. They do sync up here on the left. The left side of the mouse is the most identical portion. You can see here on the back left towards the middle and then towards the front, they are almost nearly identical. If you look at the side profile here, they are fairly similar to the front. The DeX has a little bit higher in the front where the mouse wheel is, and from that point onward, it is just an overall taller and slightly longer mouse than the Sword X, but both have a very similar kind of rounded shape with not really any sort of extreme aggressive slopes on either side of the mouse. So now that we've gone over the shapes, I quickly want to go over the price, because as someone who wasn't super familiar with ERGO mice, when I saw the $160 price tag of the DeX, I was kind of taken back by it, and it's definitely a lot of money regardless of how much the other mice are. But I was surprised to see, like, the Ponage Stormbreaker is a $170 mouse. We're looking at the Death Adder V3, that's $150. The Sword X is $155, and the cheapest one being the X-Lite V3 is only at $100. Now, that one is lacking in specs compared to its competitors, so that's, I think, why it has that cheaper price point. So it's a little bit of an outlier, but compared to the more average and more equal in terms of specs mice, I was surprised to see that the Superlight 2 DeX is actually kind of in the middle, a little bit upper mids in that kind of grouping. So regardless, though, it's a very expensive mouse, but I was shocked to see that just ERGO mice in general are kind of more expensive. So now that we're done with this portion, let's now jump to the final portion of the video, which is just my overall thoughts and opinions using the mouse. Alright guys, so like I said, I've been able to use this mouse now for about a week and a half, and I can honestly tell you it's been such a big surprise for me personally, as someone who does not and has not had a really good experience with previous ERGO mice. I've used things like the Glorious D, the Death Adder V3 Pro, the X-Lite V3, and all of those mice have just never felt really good for me personally. And I'm someone that has a average to fairly smaller hand size. I prefer like a relaxed claw grip for my mice, and with those mice I just never was able to do that. But with the Superlight DeX 2, I was able to actually get a really solid grip and a really comfortable feel that I enjoyed the heck out of. And I think the main component for that and the main reason for that is because of this left side having such a deep curve in that it actually gives you this groove here that allows you to kind of not only rest your thumb in, but allows you to dig your thumb into and gives you a kind of a thing to grip onto. And because of that, I'm able to have my relaxed claw, but not just be able to have it, but also enjoy it while using. Um, yeah, man, I've been playing games like Valorant, The Finals, and Deadlock, and those are very different games. You have a tack shooter, you have a much more faster, chaotic game with tracking and just chaos, and then you have a third-person shooter MOBA where it has its moments of flicking, does have its tracking moments, can have its chaotic moments, but also more toned down, slower moments. And because of all those three games, I feel like I've had a good variety of games to try the mouse on, and every single one I just have been blown away by. And again, I really did not have a good time with previous Ergos, and so my plan for this mouse was simply to use it, review it, and then ultimately probably just return it because I probably wouldn't enjoy it. And look, Logitech, like I mentioned, I haven't been a big fan of. They've been saying a bunch of weird things about subscription mice, blah 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 blah. I feel like they're super tone deaf to the community and what they're asking for. And although I still do believe that, I gotta commend them for making such a solid mouse with these Superlight 2 decks. Coming from a non-Ergo user, this is easily my favorite Ergo mouse I have ever used, without a doubt. I do not say that lightly. The price is high. That is something that I cannot justify. It is an expensive mouse, but the weight feels super solid. Just using it, the shape feels super solid for me personally. I just have loved the heck out of this mouse. And man, if you're someone that likes Ergo mice, I think you'll really enjoy this. If you're someone like me who hasn't had the greatest time with Ergo mice, if you have the money, give it a shot, because it surprised the heck out of me, and it might surprise you as well. That's going to end the video for today, guys. Thank you guys so much for watching. I appreciate the heck out of you. Let me know what you guys think of the video. Let me know what you guys think of the mouse if you have already purchased it and have been using it. And yeah, thank you guys so much. I'll catch you later. All right, see ya.